Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Council meeting today, the 24th of September 2020. My name is Councillor Bill Lewis, Mayor of Rugby, and I'm the chairman of this meeting. The meeting is being web streamed to the public and is being attended by members through Microsoft Teams. Before we begin working through the agenda, I will go through some rules on procedure. The web streaming of this meeting is being monitored by IT services. If at any point there are any streaming issues, then I will be informed and the meeting will be adjourned until such time that the technological issues can be resolved. If during the course of the meeting any member of the council is having connection issues, then there will be short adjournment of up to 5 minutes to determine whether the connection issues can be resolved. If following the adjournment the connection issues cannot be resolved, then providing the meeting remains quorate, it will continue. It will be deemed that the member with connection issues has left the meeting and will no longer be able to participate. For all attendees, please could you switch off your microphones and cameras now if you have not already done so. For members, your microphones and cameras shall be switched off unless you are speaking. If you wish to speak during the meeting, please use the raise hand function and wait for me to ask you to speak. The voting during virtual meetings will use the raise hand function. I will call on the Democratic Services Officer to confirm the vote at which stage members should lower their hands. Are there any questions before we move into the formal agenda? Can't see any raised hands, so we'll carry on. I will now ask our Democratic Services Officer to confirm the attendees at this meeting. This will be for members only. When your name is called out, please confirm your attendance by saying present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Mrs. Alanak.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Barrow.
Present.
Councillor Byrne.
Present.
Councillor Brader.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Bragg.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Brown.
Present.
Councillor Kieran Brown.
Present.
Councillor Butlin.
Present.
Councillor Cade.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Crane.
Present.
Councillor Cranham.
Present.
Councillor Douglas.
Present.
Councillor Miss Dumbleton.
Present.
Councillor Eccleston.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Garcia.
Present.
Councillor Gillias.
Present.
Councillor Keeling.
Present.
Councillor Miss Lawrence.
Present.
Councillor Lewis.
Present.
Councillor Lowe.
Present.
Councillor Mahoney.
Present.
Councillor McQueen.
Present.
Councillor Mistry.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. New.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. O'Rourke.
Present.
Councillor Pacey Day.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Present.
Councillor Picker.
Present.
Councillor Poole.
Present.
Councillor Ms. Robbins.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Roberts.
Present.
Councillor Howard Roberts.
Present.
Councillor
Present.
Roodhouse. Councillor Roodhouse.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Roodhouse.
Present.
Councillor Sanderson.
Present.
Councillor Shearer.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Simpson-Vince.
Present.
Councillor Srivastava.
Present.
And Councillor Mrs Timms.
I'm here as a Rugby Borough Councillor, and yes, I'm present.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Can you confirm that we have 42 members? Is that right?
So we have 3 formal apologies, Chair, so that will make 39 members present.
Thank you. Right, we'll move into the formal agenda now then. And item 1 is apologies for absence.
Councillor Ellis, Councillor Lee Hunt and Councillor Stokes.
Thank you. Move to item 2, to approve the minutes of the special meeting of council held on the 25th of August 2020. I move that the minutes of the special meeting of council held on the 25th of August 2020 be approved and adopted. Who will second the motion?
I will, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Those in favour, please show using the raised hand function.
So we've got 38 members that have raised their hand, Mr Mayor.
38 hands.
Sorry, we've got 39 now, as unanimous.
Okay, thank you very much. Please lower your hands. The motion is carried. Item 3, declarations of interest. Can I remind members that when they declare interests, they must also declare the general nature of that interest. Are there any declarations under A, non-pecuniary interest as defined by the Council Code of Conduct for councillors? Are there any hands raised?
There are none, Mr Mayor.
Right. We'll move to item 3B then, pecuniary interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for councillors.
There are none, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. And finally, item 3C, notice under section 106 Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of community charge or or council tax.
There are none, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. We move on to item 4, Mayor's announcements. I had an in-person open-air engagement on Sunday last, the 20th of September, when I attended the dedication of an interpretation board for the Gallipoli Monument on the A45 near Ryton. Mark Posey MP also attended. The interpretation board was organised by Warwickshire Wildlife Trust and the Gallipoli Association Education Coordinator as part of the Dunsmore Living Landscape Scheme. The board includes a poem written by 2 pupils of Untitled Church of England Primary School, chosen from 20 poems written by pupils of the school. I was very impressed with the standard of the poem submitted. The monument has great historical significance for rugby, as it commemorates the review near the site in 1915 by King Edward V of the 29th Division and recognises their service in Europe. It is now also regarded as a war memorial for all those of the incomparable 29 who died in Gallipoli and other theatres of war. Since this council last met, there's been a sharp rise in cases of COVID-19 in rugby. The current infection rate is at around 60 per 100,000, which is much higher than elsewhere in the county. I would like first to acknowledge the work of our staff who are working hard to slow and reverse this trend. This evening, our community wardens will be present in the town centre to offer residents and businesses advice and guidance on the new rules for pubs and restaurants. They are the first COVID marshals to be deployed in the county, and they will complement the work of the rugby street pastors and the rugby first bid rangers. We hope that they will be well received and will have a positive impact on our evening economy. I must acknowledge the effort of all our citizens in keeping the rate of infection so low in the borough until now. However, we must all remain vigilant. We know that the measures that we all took earlier in this pandemic are still successful at beating this virus. We must all continue to keep more than 2 meters apart from anyone we don't live with. We must all wash our hands regularly and for at least 20 seconds. And we must wear a face covering in enclosed spaces and on public transport. We all look forward to a time when we will have greater freedom to do the things that we enjoy. Until then, we must continue to do the right thing to protect our friends, neighbours, colleagues and families. We must do that what's right for rugby. I would also like to draw your attention to some despicable acts of vandalism that have taken place in rugby in the last few weeks. Extensive damage was done to the play area at Whitehall Recreation Ground and at the play area at Millennium Green, taking out of use facilities that are badly needed by the community they serve. Elsewhere in the town, we continue to see regular damage being done to play areas. I know that all members will agree that we would all much rather focus our efforts on providing more facilities for our residents rather than continually having to repair and replace what we already have. Thank you. Move on to item 5, questions pursuant to Standing Order 10. Are there any questions, Executive Director?
There are 4 questions, Mr. Mayor. Question A is from Councillor Mrs. New to the Leader of the Council, and she asks, as the Badger Cull is now being extended to include Warwickshire, will the Leader give assurances that any badgers who manage to escape the cull or are already living within our nature reserves will find sanctuary on RBC land and our local reserves, so they are protected from hunters intending to harm or distress them? This question has been published on our website, Mr. Mayor, along with the answer from Councillor Lowe.
Thank you. Councillor New, do you have a supplementary question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to thank Councillor Lowe for his response to my question and officers for preparing the response. I'd just like to request that when officers prepare their response, that they consult Warwickshire Wildlife Trust to be made aware of the vaccination programme being carried out at this time, and also to point out that this council has previously committed to protecting badgers living on RBC land and within our nature reserves. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor New, for your question. Yes, I'm happy to give you that assurance. And also, if it gives you any personal assurance, I do have some sympathy with the sentiment that I think is behind this question. It's obviously a hugely emotive issue, as I said in the written answer, and therefore I think it's only right and proper that we have a proper debate, which is why we're going to be moving a report to Cabinet on this issue as soon as we can. But yes, happy to give you the reassurance around the consultation that you requested.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Logan.
Mr Mayor, I'll move on to question B. Councillor Ellis asks Councillor Roberts, the Environment and Public Realm portfolio holder, has COVID-19 delayed the work of the Climate Emergency Cross-Party Working Group? And if it has, how long will it take to get things back on track? Mr Mayor, this question has also been published on our website, and the answer from Councillor Roberts is there also.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis, do you have a supplementary question?
Mr Mayor, it's Councillor O'Rourke here. Councillor isn't here, so there are no supplementary questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr Mayor, I have question C.
Thank you.
Councillor Roothouse asks the Leader of the Council, councillors are responsible to their electorate and decisions made by this council can affect their wards. What action can be taken to ensure that councillors are kept fully informed about the decisions that will affect their wards?
And the question and answer on the website as well, presumably.
That's right, Mr Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Roothouse, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Mr Mayor. Would the Leader agree with me that the protocol as mentioned in the answer does need updating, taking into account pre-consultation with elected ward members? If so, would he be willing to action this?
Thank you, Councillor Roothouse. I must confess that I personally don't agree with you. However, it is my view that all ward councillors, whatever their political party, should be properly consulted on matters that affect their ward. So if it is your view that this is the case, then I believe that's something that you and I should discuss, and I'm very happy to discuss that with you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Can we move on to
Mr
question?
Mayor, I have the final question, which is question D, and it's from Councillor Brader, who asks Councillor Mrs Crane, the portfolio holder for Communities and Homes, could the portfolio holder update the council on the application for additional funding for homelessness support mentioned by the portfolio holder for corporate resources in her report to full council on July 21st? And again, Mr Mayor, the answer and this question are both published on our website.
Thank you. Councillor Brader, do you have any supplementary questions?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to ask, is the funding enough to ensure that everyone who was given accommodation during the pandemic will continue to be housed?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brader. I will discuss with officers and revert to you, but I know that officers are doing all that they can to house everybody, and that there's nobody that is not being housed at the present time. So I will check the funding.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 6A. To receive the report of Cabinet dated the 7th of September 2020. In submitting the report of Cabinet, I shall call each paragraph number and heading. If members wish to raise questions or to comment, will they please indicate they wish to do so when I call the item. I will be calling the paragraphs according to the portfolios under which they fall. Report of Cabinet, 1st of June 2020. Councillor Miss Robbins, will you move the confirmation and adoption of item 1 of the report of Cabinet of the 7th of September 2020?
Mr Mayor, I so move.
Thank you. Paragraph 1, Finance and Performance Monitoring 2020-2021, Quarter 1. Would you like to say anything at this stage, Councillor Robbins?
No, Mr Mayor, this was presented to Cabinet last week, and everything that was said there is still holds true. I will answer any questions if there are any.
Do we have any speakers? I can't see any hands up. Can you confirm that, please?
That's right, Mr Mayor. There are no hands up.
Thank you. Do you wish to say anything at this stage then, Councillor Robbins? I doubt it, but...
No, Mr Mayor, any changes will be reported to members in the future.
Thank you. In that case, I now submit for confirmation and adoption the whole of the report. Those in favour, please show using the raised hand function.
So 34 members have raised their hand for Mr Mayor.
34. Okay. Please lower your hands.
Mr Mayor, we still have some councillors with their hands raised.
Would you please just check that you lower your hands?
That's fine, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Those against, please show using the raised hand function.
No hands are raised, Mr Mayor.
Okay. With those who are abstaining, please show, oh sorry, hang on, yeah, with those abstaining, please show using the raised hand function.
No hands are raised, Mr Mayor.
Okay. The motion is carried. We move on to item 7, to receive and consider the reports of officers. The next item is to receive the report of the Executive Director set out at item 7A of the agenda. The report concerns a review of the Council's overview and scrutiny arrangements. Councillor Lowe, will you, as leader of the Council, move the report of the Executive Director?
Mr Mayor, I so move.
Who will second the motion?
Mr Mayor, I will second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Poole. Councillor Lowe, would you like to speak at this stage?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I welcome this report and I'd like to thank all the officers and members who contributed. I'd also like at this time to thank all those members who have served on the Council's current 2 scrutiny committees, both in the current and in previous years. It is a statutory duty of this Council to have an effective scrutiny process in place, the purpose of which is to enable the decisions made by this Council to be properly informed and properly scrutinised. As someone who 2 years ago sat on what was then the Whittle Scrutiny Committee, I'm well aware of the good work that this Council has undertaken through its 2 scrutiny committees, both in current and former guise. However, Mr Mayor, times have changed. The way in which this Council works has changed, and the way in which this Council is structured is being changed. It's therefore right and proper that the way in which we approach scrutiny moves with the times. As the report states, the previous scrutiny arrangements were specifically and deliberately aligned to individual portfolios. As members will no doubt be aware, the portfolios under which this Council arranges its activities are currently subject to a review and are very likely to change. More importantly, one of the many lessons that we can draw from the way in which this council has responded to the current pandemic is that problems, when they arise, do not sit neatly within the confines of a specific portfolio. It is therefore entirely appropriate and in line with the wider direction of travel at this council that we move towards a single, all-encompassing committee that will have free rein to look across all of this council's activities, providing effective challenge and effective scrutiny, whilst also taking the lead on task and finish groups to address those issues which this council determines are its priorities. I therefore welcome this report as one of many steps which are currently being taken to transform the way in which this council operates as we move towards a more agile and efficient model which responds more effectively to the needs of our residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any speakers?
My hand is raised, Chair.
You say there is a hand raised? Oh,
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Sanderson has his hand raised.
yeah, Councillor Sanderson, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As someone who's retired from a chairmanship after 3 years of service, I do have a couple of comments on the recommendations. I note that the committee has been downgraded from an overview and scrutiny committee to just a scrutiny committee. I think that diminishes the role a little bit. I'm concerned that you're only looking to train scrutiny committee members and not task group members as well. Clearly, if you're going to chair a task group, you should have some idea of what you're actually setting out to do. My other concern is that the role of chairmanship isn't given the parity of esteem that other chairmanships on this council have. For example, in this report, it says it will be a rotating chairmanship, but for it to have a parity of esteem with other chairs, it should be a 3-year chairmanship, and that would give it that parity. I'm concerned at how we're going to make the 4 pillars that the cabinet will be working to, economy, climate, health and organisation, are going to fit into one committee, when even Hercules had a problem with struggling with 2 pillars. But I think it will, as it's not starting until November, and we're probably going to have elections in May of next year, perhaps we can come back and have a look at this again with a refreshed council.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Could you put your hand down, please?
Yeah, sure.
Are there any other speakers? Yes, we've got. Have we? No.
Mr. Mayor, can I just come in here just to clarify the first point from Councillor Sanderson?
Who's that?
It's Aftab Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry, Aftab.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just to clarify the first point of Councillor Sanderson, setting out that it is no longer an overview and scrutiny committee. It is carrying out the statutory function, and this remains an overview and scrutiny function in accordance with the statutory requirements.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any other speakers?
Mr. Mayor,
Point of
Councillor
order, Chair,
Sanderson
that's
has his
not
hand
what it
raised.
says on. Point of order, Chair, that's not what it says on the recommendation. If it's still an overview and scrutiny committee, it should say that on the recommendation.
Have we got any new speakers? No.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor New has her hand raised.
All right, Councillor New.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question regarding the chairmanship of these committees. as one member who is a carer, I would struggle to be able to chair a committee. I hope we won't, as we have only 5 members, I hope that we will be given allowances to not take up the chairmanship if it is necessary at some point. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I'm having trouble seeing the hands up on my screen tonight, so.
There are none, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe, do you wish to reply?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to start by thanking Councillor Sanderson for his long service on this council scrutiny committee and paying tribute to the efforts that he's undertaken on behalf of the people of this borough. To address his points individually, firstly, as hopefully has now already been addressed by the monitoring officer, there was not and has never been any intention to diminish the importance of this committee. Far from it. One of the things that is highlighted in the report is we'd like to see this committee play a far more leading role in driving some of this council's activities and informing its decisions through task and finish groups, something that has not taken place, in my view, with as much regularity as I would have liked in the past. I am very happy to address his issues on training, but we have followed best practice and taken advice on this matter. And I have to say, I don't personally believe there is an issue, but I'm happy to have a look at that again with officers. In terms of the chairmanship and the issue around what he termed parity of chairmanship, well, it's always been a convention in this council, by no means set down in the constitution, but a convention within this council that the opposition groups have shared the chairing of the scrutiny committees between themselves. That was pretty straightforward. Well, we had 2. Well, guess what? We've only got 1, and we have 2 opposition parties, and therefore it would not be fair, in my view, on either of the 2 opposition parties if once their member was installed as chair, he or she remained in post for the remaining 3 years. Finally, then, I'm going to come to Councillor New's point, which is that, of course, nobody will be forced to serve as chair if they do not wish to. The chair of this committee, as with all other committees, will be elected by a majority of that committee. And should somebody not wish to put themselves forward as chair, then, of course, that's entirely a matter for them.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe, for clarifying that.
Thank you. In that case, we now move to the vote. Will those in favour please show using the raised hand function?
That's 35 for. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. We've got a 37 for.
37.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Would you please lower your hands? Right, would those against please show using the raise hand function?
That's 1 against, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Would those abstaining please show?
Mr. Mayor, can I just check? I think accidentally my hand was raised during the against. I voted for it.
I see. Well, I can't tell who was whose hand was counted as against.
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, Councillor Mrs. Roberts' hand wasn't raised for voting against.
Right.
It's okay then.
Oh, that's okay then. Thank you. My machine is really playing up. Sorry.
Okay. So we got 37 for, 1 against, and no abstentions. Can you confirm that?
That's correct,
My
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I was slow to put my hand, raise my hand. So I'm going to my vote into.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I just suggest that we just take the vote again, just for clarity?
Yeah, it would be wise, I think, probably, yes. Right, let's start from the top then. Those in favour, please show using the raised hand function.
So that's 38 for, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my hand raising. Trying, I don't know if it's up or not.
I don't think it is.
Councillor New, your hand isn't currently raised.
It is now.
Thank you.
So by my reckoning, that means 39. That is unanimous.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, some members are lowering their hands and we haven't actually taken a final number yet.
Would you please keep your hands up until we ask you to lower them? So all those in favour, please raise your hands.
So that's unanimous, Mr. Mayor, that's 39.
Thank you very much. In that case, the motion is carried. I'm moving on to item 8. This is notices of motions pursuant to Standing Order 11. Set out at item 8 of the agenda are 3 notices of motion. I consider it advisable and convenient to deal with all of these tonight at this meeting. Councillor Roothouse, will you please move the motion set out in item 8A of the agenda, notice of which has been given under Standing Order 11?
I so move, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Who will second the motion?
Yes, I'll second the motion, Mr. Mayor, and reserve my right to speak.
That's Councillor Mrs. Brown, yes?
It's Councillor Mrs. Brown.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Roothouse to speak to his motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reason for the motion is most people will realise there's something called local government reform around on the horizon, and following also from the County Council's debate, which took place on Tuesday. Certainly, I think the landscape will be changing in the future. The motion as presented and as it's been mentioned in reports from the county and from the borough and district councils in Warwickshire also make the point that Rugby urban area is not parished. I think if anything is to happen in the future, that double devolution has been talked about a lot by all political parties, that we ought to explore this further. And what the motion seeks to do is to look at the urban area and to bring in the national bodies and Warwickshire bodies to look at this further. I know Councillor Brown has got further to say on this, and I also know I think Councillor Lowe and Councillor Paul will be moving an amendment later to this too, which may hopefully be accepted, but we will wait and see.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Brown, do you wish to speak on the motion?
Thank you, yes. I realise that we're in uncertain times around democratic reorganisation at the moment, but if we're doing it, it makes perfect sense, I think, to explore opportunities for some remodelling that will really improve things for the people we represent. And, you know, because unless reorganisation does this and there are better outcomes for people, it's got no purpose. I think one of the key issues here is that the town itself has got a very strong sense of place, and so do the parishes and villages, clearly, of rural Rugby, and they have their own councils representing their very local interests. And now it's the right time to look at how a more focused, localised democracy might work for our urban wards and for the centre of our town, driven by the people who use it most, who know it best and live in it day to day. we've seen during Rugby Council's response to the COVID crisis how well a very local response works. Services that the council offered were really integrated on a day-to-day basis. They were flexible, they communicated, and they worked really well together. They weren't just co-located in a building far away from the point of delivery. People knew their users on a street-by-street basis sometimes, and they were also accountable at a very grassroots level too. And I think the advantage this gives is that you can change provision swiftly to suit the need and react very quickly when things go wrong. And in times like these, and it is a really wild climate, I know we need that agility. So for the town centre and the urban wards, we need that flexibility of response, as I say, to deal with things like, well, town centre development in the current climate, housing, homelessness, climate and environmental issues, localised health problems, and all the rest of it. We need to see what's possible, what the mandatory boundaries are, what things are discretionary in terms of funding, service delivery, and so on. And, you know, let's put the ambition in there. Is there an improved operating model that ensures Rugby townspeople drive Rugby Town's future? Can we find a way to design services around the customer? Not that we don't already, but let's look at a way of sharpening that possibly, rather than make our town fit into a pre-designed template of somebody else's in a town far away. Where there are economies of scale to be made, can these be made with a detailed local knowledge of the local landscape taken into account? And I think we should find that out, and that's why I'm really happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Broom. As you've heard, there's an amendment to be moved, so I'd ask Councillor Lowe if he would please move that amendment now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the Conservative friendly amendment on notice of motion A and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I second the motion and also reserve my right to speak.
Okay. In that case, may I ask Councillor Roothouse and Councillor Mrs. Brown if they accept the amendment?
Yes, we'll accept the amendment.
Yes.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Lowe to speak on this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Roothouse and Councillor Mrs. Brown, for bringing this matter forward. Mr. Mayor, this is a matter that many councillors of all political parties have raised over recent weeks, and it may very well be this is a case where we can actually find a cross-party consensus. However, I do think we'd be missing an opportunity if we confined our considerations on this matter purely to a town council for the Rugby urban area. As highlighted in the substantive motion, there are a great many parish councils within the borough of Rugby, and these parish councils do an outstanding job for their residents. However, I'm also aware that in the current highly unusual climate, it may be the case that some of those parish councils feel that they're in need of more support in their vital work. And so the Conservative group therefore moves this friendly amendment to enable this council, through a cabinet-led working group, to look more broadly at the issues of town and parish councils to ensure that our residents and communities get the support and the representation that they need.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers?
There are none, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Poole, do you wish to speak?
I was going to speak, Mr. Mayor, but the leaders took half my speech anyway, so the answer's no, I'm afraid.
So it goes. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Roothouse, would you like to exercise your right to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and can I thank the leader and Derek also for the spirit of the friendly amendment. Quite welcome it's going to be across party and that it will report back to council by early 2021. Could just do with some confirmation as to whether it would be the leader or Derek or something, which portfolio, who will be leading on it as well. That would, I think, would help in the formulation of this going forward. But times are changing, and the world is not stopping still, and they may change very quickly. I know some people are saying the white paper is not coming, and then some people say it is coming. Things are happening down in London, and I think people should be standing ready to see what happens. And for Rugby urban area, as Councillor Brown said, I think ambition, Rugby Town does have a sense of place. It has a very strong sense of community. So there's two issues. One is the wider rural parishes, which are out there, and there's also the factor of the urban area. And we need to keep those two agendas running because they are slightly different in what they do and how they will operate. But I'm willing to get involved in that working group and work through it for the ambition for Rugby Town.
Thank you, Councillor. I shall now put the motion as amended to the vote. Those in favour, please show using the raised hand function, and please keep them up until you're asked to lower them.
That's 36 for, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Would you please lower your hands then? See, there are still some hands raised. Yeah, I think that's clear. Those against, please show using the raised hand function and keep them up until you're asked to lower them. Thank you.
No hands are raised, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. In that case, I'll ask for those who are abstaining, please. Sorry, the rest of you take your hands down, and then those who are abstaining, please raise your hands.
No hands are raised, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. In that case, the motion is carried. We move on to item 8B. Councillor Sanderson, will you please move the motion set out in item 8B of the agenda, notice of which has been given under Standing Order 11?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any of you who went out...
Can I ask for a seconder, please? Who will second the motion?
I will second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. In that case, I call on Councillor Sanderson to speak to his motion.
Anyone who went out and participated in the Keep Britain Tidy September clean could not fail to have noticed how much waste and rubbish there was on our streets. The contrived incident in the park replicating 10 tons of rubbish was okay for 5 minutes of fame, but it wasn't a policy. Likewise, the much copied Tosser leaflet is again is good to encourage people to take their rubbish home with them, but it's not policy as such. And clearly, I think there was some very good work done with the Environment and Growth Committee on public space protection orders. That could easily cover fixed penalty fines for littering and opportunist fly tipping. I understand there is an amendment coming forward, and again, I think the quicker we can get a defined policy with some good and strong reasons to push back against fly tipping and heavy littering, the better, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor McQueen, do you wish to speak on the motion as seconder?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we're all grateful for the beautiful borough that we live in. Rugby is an extremely nice place to live. And over the last 6 months, we've all had the opportunity, let's say, to get out and see more of Rugby and have our daily walks and enjoy the outdoors. And thankfully, the weather's obliged and been nice and sunny for us. But litter seems to be a growing problem around the borough. I think the work we've done with the signs going up, with the demonstration in the park where a ton of rubbish was dumped, have been a really good start. But I do think we need to strengthen our officers' options around how litter's dealt with and make sure that we're keeping Rugby Borough as nice a place for the residents as possible. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McQueen. As Councillor Sanderson has intimated, there's an amendment coming forward, so could I ask Councillor Poole if he'd move that amendment, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A friendly amendment from the Conservative Group. This council notes that the ongoing problems of fly tipping and littering throughout the borough.
Councillor Poole, can I just go ask, is there a seconder?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I second the amendment.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I do apologise.
That's all right, so your chance now to get your own back.
This council notes the ongoing problems of fly tipping and littering throughout the borough. This is, of course, a form of antisocial behaviour which impacts upon our communities, our natural habitat and our cleansing budgets. The new signage, copied from York Council, is in fact copied from Australia, where it was being used 2 years ago and was successful in reducing the amount of litter, especially in Hyde Park. We welcome the use of these posters in our parks and public open spaces. We also acknowledge that there needs to be more effective and active enforcement and covert work to bring the offenders to justice and ultimate prosecution. This council will therefore form a time-limited cross-party cabinet working party, reporting back to the council in early 2021, to consider what further measures can be taken to address the littering and fly tipping in the borough of Rugby. I so move this motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So slightly belatedly, I'll ask Councillor Sanderson and Councillor McQueen if they accept the amendment.
I accept the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Right, I can see some hands. Not quite sure whose was up first.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Noreen New has her hand up.
All right, Councillor Neil, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to also say, not is it just a blight on the landscape, but I'm very, very concerned at the amount of masks I'm seeing being discarded, which is also now a massive health hazard for people. It's also dangerous for wildlife because all the loops and things are going to catch wildlife. So if people are discarding of their mask, is there any way we can put information out to just say to people, cut the loops, because they are getting to our landfill sites and places and it will destroy further our beautiful wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Picker has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor New's actually just beaten me to it. I was going to say one of the things that I've noticed quite a lot as I've been walking around recently and during one of the litter picks I participated in is the number of masks. So I was just going to ask whether, obviously I welcome the motion and the amended motion, but as a more immediate option, could perhaps our comms team look at getting something out just to remind people that these are obviously health products and they need to be disposed of properly?
That sounds a good idea, yes. Are there any other speakers before I ask Councillor Lowe, a seconder. Go ahead then, Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So first of all, before I address the amendment in itself, I would like to give Councillor Picker and Councillor New assurances that our comms team will address that matter. It is a very serious issue, both from an animal protection and from a public health perspective. More broadly, looking at the amendment itself, I have very little to add to what Councillor Poole has already said, but I would like to make it very clear that this council is very well aware of the issues around fly tipping and littering and the problems that they cause for our communities. And I would like to give members my personal assurance that all options will be considered in terms of what we can do to address this very serious issue, and that the most effective and speedy way in which to do this will be through a Cabinet Working Party as per the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Sanderson, would you like to exercise your right to reply?
Yes, I would, Mr. Mayor. I welcome the opportunity to see this motion fast-tracked to a Cabinet Working Party, and would like to obviously participate in that, probably because I have the experience of what we did on the public space protection orders, which enabled us to do things like look at antisocial drinking, littering and substance abuse. Any requirements that we want to put for, say, for fixed penalty notices would follow along the same lines. So I would welcome this being fast-tracked and look forward to the first meeting.
Thank you very much. I shall now put the motion as amended to the vote. Those in favour, please show using the raised hand function, and please keep them up until you're asked to take them down.
That's 37 for, Mr. Mayor.
Would you please take your hands down now?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, somebody just raised their hand at the last minute, so that's 38 for.
Okay. In that case, those against, please show using the raised hand function.
Mr. Mayor, we'll just wait for everybody to lower their hands, please.
All right, a bit slow. Sorry about that, I was too quick.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm struggling to lower my hand. I am trying very.
You can have it lowered for you, I think.
Can I?
Yeah.
It keeps flicking on both. I'm trying my best to.
All right, are we all clear now, Executive Director?
We are, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. In that case, those against, please show using the raised hand function.
There are no hands raised, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any abstentions?
There are none, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. In that case, the motion is carried. We'll move on to item 8C of the agenda. Councillor Douglas, will you please move the motion set out in item 8C of the agenda, notice of which has been given under Standing Order 11.
I will, Mr. Mayor, and reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Who will second the motion?
I will second it, Mr. Mayor, and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas, would you like to speak now, please?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and good evening all. This issue is important to us all, and we all play our part in improving our environment and reducing all forms of waste as community leaders. Many of us work with local groups, residents, businesses, and do litter picks in the areas that we represent, keep our public spaces clean and tidy. As a council, we've all declared a climate change emergency and committed to ensuring that Rugby Borough Council and its supply chain are free of single-use plastic. This motion builds on these areas and says we want to do more. In July, Keep Britain Tidy reported that councils were clearing up to 57 tonnes of additional waste from their parks, and over 100 local authorities had spent an extra £33,000 on managing parks in the past 3 months. Through this motion, Rugby Borough Council can lead the war on waste and to incentivise our residents and businesses to reduce all forms of waste. We can join the Keep Britain Tidy network for additional support and introduce new ways to reduce waste, such as charity bin sponsorship schemes, and importantly encourage local supermarkets to trial reverse vending machines where customers are rewarded for returning used cans and bottles for recycling. We can promote take-up of the Environment Department's voluntary code amongst our fast food businesses and local business partnerships, as well as seek their sponsorship for the introduction of the charity bin scheme and for public education programmes. Finally, we must engage with our communities and use the power we have to remove barriers for people to reduce waste and ensure our businesses play their part as well. I hope you will all support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanderson, as seconder, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you should see this. Is my camera working okay, Chair? It doesn't seem to be happening here.
We can hear you okay.
I'll just, yeah, in terms of the motion, I think this is the carrot side of the motion on reducing waste and improving recycling within the borough. I often say we always look at the negative, who's doing the wrong things, but we never look at who's doing the right things, who's doing the good things, who we ought to be saying thank you to for keeping our environment clean and tidy. And I think one of the things on the network was encouraging funding to go to local, perhaps environmental charities if we did have a return scheme, for example. So again, I think this motion is very positive. It's got good aims, and I think it will encourage, not discourage, our community to take a more active part in recycling.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. There is an amendment being moved, so Councillor Lowe, would you like to move the amendment now, please?
Mr. Mayor, I so move and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I reserve my right to speak as well.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas and Councillor Sanderson, do you accept the amendment?
I do.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, accept the amendment, and as I understand it, this amendment will bring cabinet responsibility for this issue, and as we've already had a question raised this evening from another member on the climate change, I'm sure the portfolio holder will be aware that fellow councillors and I will be holding the cabinet to account. Thank you.
Right, are there any other speakers? I can't see any hands raised. Is that confirmed?
That's right, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Poole, our seconder, do you wish to speak?
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I believe you haven't asked me to speak as proposer of the amendment yet.
You're absolutely right. My apologies. Councillor Lowe, would you like to speak on the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be very brief but very clear. Largely, as this amendment is in effect a continuation of the previous amendments and has therefore already been dealt with. Very clearly, there's no excuse for littering, and I'd like to give all members our assurance that this council is committed to doing whatever it takes to combat this very serious issue. As earlier in this meeting, we've now agreed to establish a cabinet working party to look at the issues of fly tipping and littering more broadly. I hope that members and the public will see that we're taking this issue very seriously. I'm pleased that Councillor Sanderson and Councillor Douglas have accepted this in the spirit of it being a friendly amendment, and look forward to working with councillors of all parties on the establishment of the Cabinet Working Party and getting a quick result on this very important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Before asking Councillor Poole, I'll just ask again if there are any other speakers, just to make sure. No?
There are none, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Our seconder then, Councillor Poole, would you like to speak?
As I said before, Mr. Mayor, no, thank you. It's all been said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Douglas, would you like to exercise your right to reply, which you've done already by the sound of it?
Thank you for the offer, Mr. Mayor, but all's been said. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, I shall now put the motion as amended to the vote. Those in favour, please show using the raise hand function, and keep your hands up, please, until you're asked to take them down.
That's 38 for Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Please lower your hands. Still got a couple of hands up, I think.
That's all hands lowered, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Those against, please show using the raise hand function.
That's none against, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Are there any abstentions?
No abstentions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. In that case, the motion is carried. Thank you. We move on to item 9, correspondence. Is there any correspondence, Executive Director?
There is none, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We move on to item 10, Common Seal. I move that the Common Seal be affixed to the various orders, deed and documents referred to in item 6 of the agenda paper. Who will second the motion?
I will, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Those in favour, please show using the raise hand function and keep your hands up until you're asked to take them down. Thank you.
That's 37 for Mr. Mayor.
Can I check, have you all sure you've raised the hand when you want to raise them? Has that changed at all, Claire?
There are 38
Yes.
members now for.
Okay. Well, in view of the fact that I thought we had 39 members, I need to ask, please lower all your hands, and then those against, please show.
There are none against, Mr. Mayor.
Right, we seem to have lost someone. Are there any abstentions?
No abstentions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. In that case, the motion is carried. We move on to item 11, motion to exclude the public under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972. Under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following item on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of information defined in paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the Act. I so move. Who will second the motion?
I will, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Those in favour, please show using the raise hand function, and please keep them up until you're asked to take them down.
That's 38 for, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Can you please take your hands down?
That's all hands lowered, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Again, in view of the fact that we had 39 people present, I must ask, are there any against? Please raise your hand.
None against, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And are there any abstentions?
No abstentions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The motion is carried. That concludes the public part of the meeting. May I ask IT support to stop the live streaming and to confirm to me when it has been stopped? Thank you.